Well, I'm going to get us started. And you may not have realized, but many of our previous meetings, we've had like over 60 slides on our slideshow. And I was impressed this week, we only have like 18. Wow. And so we're going to not try to talk very much and make time for us to do a little work and like workshop today. And so I'm going to try and be brief as I share. But the focus of our meeting today, next slide, is going to be on talking about stories and how do we engage our elected officials. So us as the Faith and Housing Coalition, we could have the best solutions to our housing crisis. We could have a bunch of people organize all the power in the world, but if we're not able to influence the people in power who actually make the decisions, we're not going to be able to have an impact at all. And there are other groups that are against what we want to have happen that are very organized and regularly have contact and influence over those who have power and who make decisions. And so one of the tools, so we're actually in the process of, there's some meetings that are being scheduled. Thomas will share about this more later with some of our state assembly members in the coming weeks. So we're going to encourage you guys, if you're available, to attend those. And to prep us for this time, one of the most powerful ways that we can engage and influence our elected officials who make decisions is through story, the power of stories. So I think we took some time at a previous meeting to talk about stories, but we didn't have a lot of time to go through it. So that's going to be focus of our time today. Next slide, Thomas. So I just want to share real quick a little bit about the power of stories and share some testimonies, some examples where stories really made an impact, made a difference in to sway some decision makers. So like we all know, stories really are more than data or numbers or figures, have the power to really stick in your heart and really pull on your heartstrings, and the power to change your perspective. And so, for example, in 2019, there was some, in LA City, there was some new tenant protections that were going to go into place. And they were having this debate, do we freeze the rents before these tenant protections go into place? It was kind of this conversation they were having. And a woman named Maria got up and she shared in front of the city council how in the last year her rent had been increased 4 times. And she said, you know, I've worked for 35 years cleaning houses. I've helped build this community. And if my rent goes up one more time, I'm going to be homeless. And she asked for them to kind of do this rent freeze so that she could be able to stay in her home. And as the city council members were discussing what they were going to do, many of them would bring up Maria and share her story, which shows that her story had an impact on them. And it really shifted their perspective from, this is just something about numbers and, you know, landlords, to, hey, we need to actually do this because we need to protect people from getting displaced. We need to help people have long-term, be able to stay in their homes. So, you know, rent control and all that is a big topic. But the point is, her story really stuck with people, and it really influenced how they decided what they were going to do. Thomas is going to share another story he has where a story really made an impact.
So this is a story about Santa Monica, which is not a place that any of us live, to my knowledge. It is one of the most expensive places in SoCal. So does anyone want to venture a guess what a single-family home in Santa Monica costs right now?
1.5 million.
More.
2 at least.
Above.
3.
2.5.
Oh my
So,
god.
Dang.
Yeah, so the average single-family home in Santa Monica.
Those are just abstract numbers.
Yeah, I mean, Beverly Hills is the highest. It's like 5 over 5, the average single-family home. So that is Santa Monica. It's a very expensive place to live. It also, we've talked about this in the past, it takes like 4 to 8 years for homes to move through the approval process in Santa Monica. So the bigger the project, the closer it is to 8, right? And a big reason for that is that they have a real culture of being slow growth. And there's actually a really interesting history It goes back to the 70s. There were a bunch of like kind of progressive radicals who felt like the city was growing too much, basically, and so they wanted to stop that. And they basically created their own like machine that basically picks the politicians. And one of the politicians who came up through this machine, his name was Kevin McCowan. He actually worked, before he got into politics, he worked at the local high school. He worked on computers. He was like their Macintosh computer. If you remember when, some of us remember when schools still had Macintosh computer labs and you would go and they would teach you how to use Google, which is very quaint, today. But that was his job. And he was in office from 1998 through 2021. And when he was elected, he was very skeptical of building housing. So he was very like, we don't need more housing in Santa Monica. We've already developed. He was very interested in homelessness. So he was very interested in housing the homeless population in Santa Monica. But he didn't want other people, like new people, to come to Santa Monica. But over time, he actually became more open on this issue. And in hearing the story, I thought it was really interesting because the way he became more open was hearing the story of students at the local high school and how there were students who would graduate Santa Monica High or Samohi. Samo High, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm not from Santa Monica, clearly. But he cared about them because he worked at the high school for decades. And the story he heard was about people who would go to school, in some cases go to college, but still not be able to afford to return to Santa Monica because there was no new housing being built. And a particular story, which included data, but was kind of embedded in a story, was that over the 25 years, over the last 40 years, that he had lived in Santa Monica, the city had built far less housing than students who graduated from the local high school. And when he heard that, it clicked for him, and he said, wait a second, if we don't build enough housing for students to come back, then they're going to leave and go somewhere else, right? Like literally, we have to be at least building enough housing for the kids who are graduating if we want to keep families intact, if we want to keep generations together. So it made a real impression on him, and he actually started quoting this. I found an article that he wrote where he said, if we can't house our own talented kids, how can we house the homeless, right? It clicked into place for him that even just this issue that he cared about, right, homeless housing, if you're not housing, students, right, of course the people who are the most vulnerable are going to get pushed out of the city eventually, right? So this really made an impression on him. He kind of changed. He didn't become like totally, what I would consider like pro-housing on every issue. But he really did change his views. And what's cool is that I heard the story from a current member of a Santa Monica City Council, which just this month decided to end single-family zoning in the city of Santa Monica and allow up to 20 units. Yes. So it's still there'll probably be a lawsuit about it. So,
So don't get this.
but they have they have built on his kind of turn where like the whole city council used to be very like we don't want to build new housing to now they have a majority of the city council that is hey we recognize the need to build more housing, and so they're pushing forward these policies that would allow for in the long run more affordable affordability of the market. So it all started with stories about high school students. So
it's a powerful story, and just like you said, that story of high school students was the seed that like grew and has led to them getting rid of single family housing zoning, which is like a miracle, amazing, like what we all are fighting for, and is unheard of or just it's really hard to see. So so as we enter in to stories, I think this was a helpful framework I learned about recently that helps us think about how to line things up. So the story of me is like our personal stories. There's like a lot of pop-ups you're gonna have to click. Okay. So the first part is like, no, what's my story, and do I know what my housing story is? Can I tell that to other people? And the second level. Yeah. The second level is like on a group community level. What's our story? It might be us as Faith in Housing, or your neighborhood. What's your neighborhood story when it comes to housing? So for example, for me, one of my personal stories is like I pay over 50% of my income on rent. My rent went up from like $1,600 to $2,300 when I moved a few years ago. A community story in East LA is we build lots of affordable housing, but the last affordable housing building they built, there was like 2,000 households that applied for it and only like 79 spots. There's just not enough for the need. And then the story of now is like, what is happening? What's the opportunity that is available to us? What is going on? What's the moment we are called to rise up to meet? And so I think one more. The moment right now I think is SB 79 is the now that we've been kind of fighting for. It's the opportunity of like the story that's happening. We have an opportunity to open up single family zones around transit and build more dense housing, right? And so the goal, as we are going to be advocating for SB 79, hopefully have an opportunity to some of us to meet with our elected officials. How do you tell either your story or your community story in a way that matches with what's going on with SB 79? Does that make sense? Like what's the story that we have that's going to match with this opportunity that's going to compel our elected officials to be like, hey, that was a really powerful story. I see now why SB 79 would be a good thing. Right, for the Santa Monica example, it was the story of students not having housing that made them be like, oh, we need to build more housing. And so what we're going to do today, I have a handout here. You can take one and pass it. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes right now in pairs to just bullet point, what are my housing stories? It could be from someone, your own personal life. It could be someone you know, a friend or a family member or a coworker, or a neighbor. It could be what you feel like this is kind of the group story of my neighborhood, right? For example, I have friends who organize in Pomona, and they're like, the story of Pomona is people feel like, oh, we're just Pomona, so anything can happen to us. We'll let any business come in because we need to take what we can get. And that's like the story of Pomona. That's the collective attitude, right? So you might have a sense of like, this is what my community story is. This is how people kind of think in my neighborhood. Or you might think of like, what are my hopes and dreams when it comes to housing? So I want you guys to talk in pairs and bullet point 3 to 4. What are your 3 to 4 stories? For example, so for me, I shared, my own personal story with rent. I can share stories about people I know and their housing situations. The story I shared about the apartment building, that's an example. So those are on my bullet points. So for you, what are your housing stories? And we're going to take time. After that, Thomas is going to share a little bit about SB 79, and we're going to think about, okay, which of my stories is best going to line up with the moment that's happening right now? Which is going to be the most compelling to strike at the hearts of our elected officials to compel them to be like, oh man, I see how SB 79 is the solution, is going to help us move forward. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, because I think this is really important to think about. It's like when you think of yourself as a character, who are the other characters in your story? What's really important about that next level of like us is like, who are the other characters in the story kind of changes, right? Because, I think especially when you say like, for example, if East LA, we're trying to build a lot of affordable housing. What about San Marino? Are they trying to build even one apartment? And
Exactly.
SB 79 is really important for helping people see that shift in the characters, that it's not just about individuals, but like the who the character is kind of needs to shift a little.
Thank you, G. I think that's partly why I want you guys to think about the communal stories, because as I was thinking about this, I'm like, yeah, I could share my story about my rent going up, but like, how does that connect to SB 79? But what does feel like it connects is, hey, we're building all this housing in my neighborhood, but they're not building it over there, and that's not fair. Why is that? SB 79 is going to help make it fair, right? That's just an example.
I know. I did a little vetting of it. So
Yeah.
this is how many units are being built in LA County, and this is how many LAUSD graduates there are each year, and then this is the 6th largest colleges in LA County. So like UCLA, Cal State LA, like how many graduates there are. So just as a comparison, we're also not building enough housing to house graduates in LA.
Wait, go back.
So it's about 2 to 1 for colleges. So, and that's just the 6th largest, not counting like community colleges or other levels. So anyway, that's just a little aside. How did you? So we've talked about SB 79 a lot the last meeting, so we're not going to take a ton of time to like go over all the details of the bill. But the core idea with this is it's trying to make it easier to build housing around like transit in LA, like build more. And there's kind of 4 maybe talking points that I would point to as to why this is really important for our context, and also like that would connect to your housing stories. So the first is just, as we've talked about, when you build more housing, it helps to at least stabilize, if not lower, housing prices, right? And that means that over time, people have more options, more choices of places they can live. You might not be someone who wants to live in an apartment next to transit, but other people do, and they won't be the people who are competing with you for the house that you do want to live in, right? So it just gives everyone more options, right? So I think that is often the one that's the easiest to point to, is like, hey, we all want rent and home prices to be more affordable so we can have access to better options. The second one, which I think for some of us might be a good thing to think about, is opening up high opportunity neighborhoods. So Alex has already referred to this, talking about there's neighborhoods like San Marino, right? No shade against people who I know a guy who grew up in San Marino, great guy, but he can't help that. He didn't choose where to grow up. But they've literally built 0 new apartments in the last 25 years. Like it's like illegal in San Marino to build apartments, based functionally. So now in the current firm for SB 79, actually, San Marino would still actually probably not be forced to build apartments, but there's other high opportunity neighborhoods. For instance, South Pasadena, that would be forced or be pushed in the direction of allowing more people to live there. Rancho Park is a great example. So Epicenter West LA, the church is adjacent to Rancho Park, and it's mostly like $2 million homes that are there, right next to the train stop. And I'm sure there's people at Epicenter West LA who would love to live closer to church, but cannot afford a $2 million home. Maybe some can, I don't know. That's not my business. But the idea that more folks could live closer to where they go to church, where their community is, that's a real, and places that don't have the same level of risk of displacement and gentrification that somewhere like the East Side does, right? Where I live, where some of us live. Another issue is addressing homelessness and preserving existing affordable housing. So SB 79 is crafted in such a way that you can't take down existing affordable housing to build new housing. That's one of the kind of stipulations in the law. And what we do know from research is that when you build new housing, it actually helps to protect and preserve the existing affordable housing. I don't know if you guys remember back in February, I did some analysis of the data that was coming out around rent gouging when the fires were happening. And if you look at which apartments were going up the fastest in response to scarcity, it was the low-end apartments. It was not the high-end apartments. It was the low-end apartments. So in situations where you don't have enough housing, it's actually the cheapest apartments that go up the fastest, because that's where there's the most potential in renovating it, going up market, or even in the case of the fires, they weren't even renovating these apartments. They were just trying to attract higher income people who were desperate for housing. So if you build new housing, it helps to deflect that pressure to take existing affordable housing and take it up market. And then there's a lot of non-housing benefits to SB 79, which you can also talk about if you feel like it connects to your story. We're focused on housing, but the budget. So there's analysis showing that if the city of LA just built more housing around transit, there was a big budget crisis this year in the city of LA. They had to cut a bunch of positions. They wouldn't have had a budget, or they wouldn't have had a budget shortfall if they had simply allowed more housing to be built, because property taxes would have gone up. Climate, right? Like where, a lot of people care about. I was talking to someone a couple weeks ago who goes to a church where they actually have like a creation care climate team, because that's something their church really cares about. I don't think any of our churches have that. But in their case, that was something they really cared about. and the idea that, oh, if you're going to build around transit, more people will take it, and that helps to make the city more sustainable. And then transit, we're investing $400 billion in building trains, but ridership is actually going down because the housing around transit is getting more expensive. And so all that money, it's not quite going down the drain, but it's not really being used effectively because, we're not actually allowing people to walk to the train stations that we're building. That's one of the big fights on the west side, right? Is we're building the purple line out to Westwood. Westwood is an extremely NIMBY area. Home prices there are like $3 or $4 million, and they do not want their train stations to have apartments next to them. Even though it's super strategic for this investment that we're spending billions of dollars on this subway line going out to the west side, it would make a lot of sense to allow people to live next to that subway line. So that's one of the things that SB 79 will help do. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So in thinking about your stories, right, you've taken some time to brainstorm stories. You can think about which of these kind of benefits makes the most sense for your story, right? Connects the best to your story. I will just real quick. I took some time last night to write out my story to try to show like what it looks like to try to connect these two things. So bear with me. My name is Thomas Irwin. So this is I'm framing this right as if I was talking to like an official who doesn't know me. So my name is Thomas Irwin. I've lived on the east side for the last 11 years doing work in the community. After my wife and I got married, we quickly realized that even together, we would struggle to buy a house in Los Angeles that we could afford. Most of the homes that we initially looked at were single-family homes. But these were out of our price range as parents of a young child who worked in nonprofits and don't get paid a ton. We realized, though, that we could opt for an alternative. We chose to buy a duplex with a friend as our pathway to home ownership, which has been a huge win for our family because we paid about 50% less than we would have paid for a single-family home, and it's helped keep us in LA and raise our 2 kids. And what's frustrating to me is to realize that this kind of housing, a duplex, which is really common in my neighborhood, would not be a homeownership option for most folks in LA County because 90% of land in LA County makes building a duplex illegal, right? It is illegal to build a duplex in most of our county. And so one of the reasons I support SB 79 is I firmly believe that families should have the chance to own a home in every neighborhood in Southern California. In many of our most exclusive suburbs with the best jobs and the best schools, families only have one option, a $2 to $3 million single-family home. And I believe families should have more options, like mine did, to live where they want. And I think SB 79 is a great step to get there. It's an example of, right, tying, this is my family story, this is something that, we actually experienced, and then there's a connection to a policy, right? Now, it takes time to like think through, how to best connect it, which is why we had you brainstorm multiple kind of frames to think about your housing story. But that's kind of what we want you to do right now. Take some time to write out your story and think about how to connect it to SB 79. If you get stuck, we'll have some time in pairs to workshop and brainstorm. But